Captain Peter Cutsi, South Korea, and this is my briefing room. Welcome to another briefing. We're going to cover part one of go-around procedure. We're going to have a look at what the FCOM says, a little bit of ground school here, and also what the FCTM says before we get into the presentation itself as a review, because some of what's written in the FCOM, it's all correct, but it's hard to decipher. We'll just go over a little bit of it. I don't have it referred to as a link in this PowerPoint for the reason that I've mentioned before. I don't like taking PNG or JPEG file pictures because I can't access PDF files in PowerPoint presentations. So I've made the actual tailored PDF files from both the FCOM and the FCTM and inserted them in a supporting supplementary folder within my package in Google Drive so that you can actually refer to them the way I'm going to show them to you in this PowerPoint. All right, let's get on with the presentation and let's go directly to the FCOM and have a look at the description of what we're talking about go-round. Go-round mode is engaged by pushing either TOGA switch. TOGA stands for takeoff, go-round. The logic is different. So when you're in flight, it's armed, and we'll talk about how it's armed. And when you're on the ground, it's armed, but the actual logic after takeoff is different than what you will actually receive when you're touching TOGA in flight. So one is takeoff and one is go-around, but it's the same switch. All right. So an autopilot go-around requires dual autopilot operation. So if you are using both autopilots for an auto approach and auto land, depending on what you're doing in your company, and you press the TOGA switch, you will actually be able to execute a two autopilot go-around procedure. The autopilots will remain engaged, both of them, and we'll explain a little more later of when they actually disengage. But two autopilots engaged, TOGA, you can execute an automatic go-around. If you only have one autopilot engaged and you select either TOGA switch, the autopilot disengages and you manually execute the go-around. Important to know. So with the auto throttle arm switch and the armed at arm, the auto throttle go-around mode is armed when descending below 2,000 feet RA and when above 2,000 feet RA and the flaps are not up or the glide slope is captured, or with or without AFDS engaged. So it's good to know that so that you can understand. So the autopilot go-around, the autopilot go-around mode requires dual autopilot operation, as I mentioned, and it's available after flare armed is enunciated. Flare armed, that's in the pitch mode part of the FMA, the rightmost part of the FMA on your PFD. It'll be white. All right. So, and prior to the approach sensing touchdown. So if is available after flare armed is enunciated and prior to touching down, the autopilot go-around is available under those two situations. With the first push of either TOGA switch, auto throttle, if armed, engages in go-around. So the auto throttle enunciation, FMA enunciation, is the one on the left, top left of your FMA. Remember, top left is auto throttle, center is roll mode, and the right is your pitch mode. thrust advances to the reduced go-around N1 to produce 1,000 to 2,000 feet per minute. Don't push it twice. Pushing it a second time will give you full N1 thrust. And it may be, in most cases, way too much. Pitch mode engages in toga. So your pitch mode is the enunciation on your FMA on the right-hand side of your top right of your primary flight display, and it will indicate toga. Indicating the flight director pitch commands 15 degrees nose up until reaching a program rate of climb. And the flight director pitch then targets airspeed for each setting based on maximum takeoff calculations. So we'll talk about that a little later also. And the NG uses 80,000 kilos. And I don't know what the max will use, but I would think because the NG 79,015 kilos, they went to 80,000 kilos for a VREF reference of 154, and then adding 155. On the max, I'm going to say it will be close to 170 because of the weights being considerably higher. You can find that in your specific FCOM under limitations. Now, flight director roll command holds a current ground track at or below 400 feet RA. Above 400 feet RA, LNAV will engage. The roll mode enunciation will display LNAV at or below the 400 feet RA and LNAV engaged. So LNAV armed at or below 400 feet, that's in white, and above 400 feet, green, indicating engaged. The IS Mach displays blank. The command airspeed cursor automatically moves to the target speed for the existing flap based on the maximum takeoff calculations. And for flaps up, that will be 154 knots plus 155 knots for the 737 NG. And for the max, close to 170 is my guess, not having your aircraft weights for whatever max you're using. If the toga switch is pressed after touchdown and prior to autothrottle disengagement, the autopilot disengages. I'm talking about a two autopilot approach, flare and landing. So if you touch toga after you touch down and prior to autothrottle disengagement, which is 2 seconds after touchdown, so somewhere between touchdown and 2 seconds, if you touch toga, the toga switch, the autopilot will disengage and the autothrottle may command go round thrust. Make sure you practice on the ground where the toga switches are with respect to the thrust levers, where they're actually located on the thrust levers, and also the autothrottle disengage. The autothrottle disengage selectors buttons are on either side of the left and right thrust levers knob. So make sure you understand which ones do what. With the second push of toga, after autothrottle reaches reduced go-around thrust, the autothrottles will advance to the full go-around N1 limit. That's why you don't just push it twice to make sure you've got it. You have to understand your airplane. One push, 1,000 to 2,000 feet per minute. The second push, the maximum thrust, maximum N1. And on a go-around, you're probably, you're much lighter than you were on takeoff, of course. And you make an approach at your destination and you go around, you're fairly light. You're under your maximum landing weight. So if you touch toga twice, you're going to really pitch up. And if your missed approach altitude is close, is not far away, such as in Los Angeles, the missed approach altitude the last time I can remember years ago was at 2,000 feet, runway 24 right. Wow, you're going to get to 2,000 feet above sea level that fast. So you want to make sure that you push the toga switch once. All right, we'll get into the handling later in the next video. A little bit more on this. This is all in your FCOM, so you want to understand toga mode termination. How do you come out of toga from the autopilot go-around? Below 400 feet RA, the AFDS remains in the go-around mode unless both autopilots and both flight directors are disengaged. I'll say it again. Below 400 feet, the AFDS remains in go-around mode unless you disconnect both autopilots and flight directors or disengage them. Above 400 feet RA, selecting a different pitch or roll mode, such as if the roll mode is changed first, the selected mode engages in a single autopilot roll operation and is controlled by the autopilot which was first in command, but it remains in a dual autopilot control toga mode. Important to really know that. So you're really still using two autopilots for pitch, but only one for roll, depending on which autopilot you engaged first. That's if the roll mode is changed first. If the pitch mode is changed first, the selected mode engages in a single autopilot pitch operation, and it's controlled by the autopilot which was first set in command. The second autopilot disengages. The roll mode engages in control wheel steering roll. So that control wheel steering roll amber alert on your PFD, oh, the autopilot, there's something wrong with the airplane. There's nothing wrong with the airplane. The airplane is programmed that way to remind you that you actually selected a pitch mode first rather than a roll mode. So you have to know your airplane. The auto throttle go around mode is terminated when another pitch mode is selected or altitude acquire enunciates engaged. Remember, altitude acquire happens just before you capture your altitude. On capture of your missed approach altitude, altitude hold is engaged. All right, so you can read this in the supplementary data that I've given you. Now, remember when you are actually doing a dual channel approach, two autopilots, below 400 feet, the autopilot trims nose up a little bit. And again at 50 feet, twice, 400 feet and at 50 feet, to aid in the flaring for the auto flare and touchdown. So the autopilot has now initiated a nose up trim. If you decide to go around, you may not be in trim unless you use nose down trim later on. Otherwise, you'll have problems. So if the stabilizer trim position is not satisfactory for a single autopilot operation, altitude acquire is inhibited. So you may not get your altitude acquire. And don't blame the airplane. It's because you didn't use nose down trim. This is after on the missed approach. Autopilot disengage lights illuminate steady red, and the pitch remains in toga. To extinguish the autopilot disengage lights, disengage autopilots, or select a higher altitude in the MCP. Probably better to disengage the autopilots and then manually fly the airplane. So make sure you understand your airplane before you do any kind of flying, especially understanding how to do an auto approach and landing. Flight director go around if both autopilots are not engaged. That is, if you're doing a single autopilot approach and you go around, the autopilot disengages. So if both autopilots are not engaged, a manual flight director only go around is available under the conditions in flight below 2,000 feet RA, in flight above 2,000 feet RA with flaps not up or you're already captured on the glide slope, not in the takeoff mode. Remember I mentioned toga is takeoff or go around. So as long as you're not in the takeoff mode and if toga switches are activated after touchdown, will spin up. So that's a flight director go around. Is available under those 4 conditions. Now remember, when you touch the with the first push of the toga switches, you get 1,000 to 2,000 feet per minute. We're looking at an 8% gradient Boeing have built into the NG. So it pitches to 15 degrees initially, and then upon reaching a program rate of climb, and then it maintains a mixture of the pitch and rate of climb, or just a speed at that time, depending on your rate of climb at that time. The second push of toga, as we mentioned before, you end up getting full N1 limit. So it's important that you know that. Now, the single engine go around is rather interesting, and you should really know it because it's part of knowing your aircraft. Flight director roll commands hold current ground track at or below 50 feet. Above 50 feet, LNAV will engage. This is on a single engine go around. The roll mode enunciation will display LNAV engaged above 50 feet above ground. Pitch mode engages in toga, and pitch engage mode enunciation on the FMA indicates toga. Now, the target speed is displayed on the IS Mach display. The flight director target speed is displayed on the airspeed cursor. The pitch commands 13 degrees of pitch. Remember when we talked about the engine out on the briefings I was giving you? If you had an engine out right after V1, your target reference was to pitch up to 12 to 13 degrees of pitch. And we said use 12.5. Well, here you go. Your actual pitch target commands 13 degrees nose up. As climb rate increases, flight director pitch command maintains the target speed. Now, if the engine failure occurs prior to go-around engagement, the flight target speed is selected on the MCP. We'll go through that in more detail in another part of the PowerPoint briefing. So remember that the target speed is never less than V2 based on flat position, unless there is a wind shear condition. So go through this. The FCOM does a good job of it. It's the only area that you will probably have to read several times to fully understand it. And you've got to really think about it. But this is a good picture, and this is the automatic go-around profile. It's a nice picture. There's your LNAV armed, all right? And there's your LNAV captured. It's above 400 feet. This is a 2-engine automatic go-around. Okay, so that is that for wind shear. I've covered the following in my wind shear briefing. Now remember, the 600 feet per minute is the magic figure, all right? As climb rate increases above 600, the flight director will pitch attitudes which result in acceleration. But if your rate of climb in wind shear is less than 600 feet per minute, it will actually give you, your command Mars will give you reference to a pitch reference, 15 degrees. Okay, let's go to, this is right out of the FCTM. This is the profile out of the FCTM, just what we basically covered. So you can look at that, and we're gonna cover that in more detail later in the PowerPoint itself. So that is basically what I wanted to cover in part 1. So I'll stop this video, and if you have any questions, all my contact information is on screen. I'll be doing part 2 of the go-around very shortly. So there will be a go-around part 1, go-around part 2. These will be in the MP4 recordings of my package in Google Drive. And the PowerPoint show, this show, is one PowerPoint, including everything that I'll do in part 2 of the briefing. Thanks for watching.